You're all set.
All right, thank you. Good morning. It is Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. It's 8:31 a.m. and I'll call the Personnel Board to order. First item of business is approval of the September 9, 2024 meeting minutes. Were there any questions or comments on these?
Nope.
All right, I'll accept a motion.
Second.
All right, I'll move to accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. John?
Aye.
Michelle?
Aye.
Dorian?
I wasn't at the meeting, but can I just approve them or not?
You can approve, not approve, or abstain.
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, and I will vote aye. So it's a 301 vote. Next is employee transition report. Vanessa?
Yes, good morning. Just wanted to let you know that one of our part-time dispatchers has resigned from his position over at Public Safety. So the chief and I are advertising that right away.
Sorry to hear that. Thanks for letting us know.
Sure.
All right, next is 3A, Deputy Fire Chief, review of contract versus SAP. So we currently do not have a deputy fire chief. It is my understanding that the fire chief has the intention of bringing forward that job position at the spring town meeting for funding. To give everyone some history, and Dorian probably actually remembers this, Chief Morrow, who is twice now removed as fire chief, brought this forward about 5-ish years ago. And it never actually proceeded to the budget. I think it was withdrawn at some point during the budget process. What I want to just make the board aware of today and make sure everyone's on the same page as me, because it will influence what we do with future agendas or not, is because we have a strong fire chief in terms of our bylaw in town. The fire chief has the appointing authority, which also has the ability to, if this position is funded, to put it under a contract, as opposed to having it on the SAP. So this is one of those positions that would be eligible for a contract. It is the current intention of the fire chief that that is the direction they would go if they got funding. So with that being said, is if it's a contract position, my personal opinion, and this is what I want the board to discuss, is we should not be reviewing the job description and we should not really be involved in any sort of grading process unless there's any chance they would like this to sit on the SAP. So I just welcome everyone's thoughts based on the direction that they're headed with that.
What's the difference between the police lieutenant who's under contract and he's under in this position?
Strong chief versus not strong chief.
And
The strong chief bylaw, and Mark, I don't know if you want to weigh in here too, but the fire chief is covered by the strong chief bylaw and has all appointing and firing authority. The
yeah,
police chief does not have that same authority.
Yeah, that's correct.
so the Board of Selectmen hire the police lieutenant?
Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen hire all police officers, regardless of rank.
Jason, if there's a possibility that they could put this position into the SAP, how do you want to handle that? Because if they do put it, we haven't looked at it and we haven't approved it or graded it.
Yeah, and that's the conversation I had with the chief. I said, if there's even a 5% chance that you're gonna come to us and want in the SAP, we have to start now. You'll have to come bring us your job description. We'll review it and then grade it. And I said, I have no idea where the grading will fall out as well, right? But then you'll be bound by that kind of range, for purposes of, setting a salary too, obviously up to the midpoint and all that stuff as well. So he, at least as of now, was leaning towards a contract only position, and that's how they were going to advertise it. So if that's his position, I guess the question for the board is, do we want to add it to the SAP or not?
Well, I'm having a hard time distinguishing between the difference between the police lieutenant, who's the second in command on the police department, and a deputy fire chief, who would be the second in fire department. I mean, I really support the chief needs a deputy chief. I don't have any problem with that, but I don't understand the difference between the two.
Mass general law is, I think, the easiest way to put it. There's just two different appointing powers.
How does the salary get set then, if it's under contract? How does that process work?
Mark?
So the salary is set by the fire chief, and then has to be approved by the select board. So that is the one, so if you recall in, Public Works, DPW superintendent and the special act had similar authority to that of a strong chief. But the same as a strong chief, the chief presents, would present the salary to the select board. The select board need to ratify it.
What happens with the police lieutenant? You negotiate that contract, right?
It's not a contract, John. The police
Police
are
lieutenant
under, it's
isn't under contract?
No,
an SAP position.
there was a letter of agreement, John, that was done between the police lieutenant and the, well, I take that back. Let me fix that. It was not a letter of agreement between the lieutenant and the select board. Select board did a policy on the police lieutenant position to outline what benefits that position would receive. Because again, it's not union, but it does you know, we have historically had benefits from the police union contract that the lieutenant position would receive. So that was a policy that was done by the board. But the board does do the hiring. The recommendation for the police lieutenant came to the select board from the police chief, and the select board has to ratify that decision.
So the question remains, if the fire chief intends to issue a contract, unless someone speaks now, and obviously this position has to be funded, vetted through town meeting process, but assuming the position passes, and if he intends to do it via contract, I'm not planning to bring him in to a personnel board meeting unless someone says otherwise here. If he changes his mind at any point, and time is ticking, obviously, and wants it in the SAP and have that option, then we will bring him through our normal motions, but we will set a deadline of the latest of when that would have to happen to make sure that it was vetted in time for a spring annual town meeting.
What is the length of the contract? I'm just not familiar with this piece, so I'm probably not gonna be helpful in like saying yes or no at the moment, but like, what is the length of the contract? And I don't know enough about the implications of this process of putting someone on contract and having oversight of the salary and benefits. That happens through the select board, is that correct?
Yeah, we as a personnel board don't have oversight.
You won't.
We,
Right, of course,
yeah,
if it's under contract.
correct. Mark, can you answer Michelle's
Yeah,
question? on what's
the contract renews annually, Michelle, subject to appropriation. So it's similar, it's similar. It's exactly what the Board of Health just did for the new health director position. It's a 1-year contract that renews annually, subject to appropriation.
I see. Okay.
The police lieutenant is not under contract.
No,
on the SAP?
He's on the SAP.
correct.
Correct.
And if they're in the SAP, they don't have a contract.
All
They're
right.
not union.
So what you're saying, Jason, is that because the deputy fire chief would be under contract, the fire chief sets his wages, subject to approval.
And approval of the Board of Select Board.
Why should the fire deputy chief and the police lieutenant be different? Just
That's not,
strong chief?
the strong chief bylaw is what enables that, John.
Yeah.
But I don't think whether that's the right answer or not is for discussion in this forum. It's really if the question is if the fire chief chooses to go down that road with their appointing authority, I just wanted to make sure the personnel board was aware, one, which I think is the most important, and two, just in agreement on what our role is or isn't.
Okay. The police chief is not a strong chief.
Correct.
Okay.
So the decision really isn't about whether or not this happens. If the chief is deciding if it's contract or going through the SAP. So that's not the decision or the sort of vote we have to make today, right? Because we don't have a vote because of the bylaw.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
more FYI so that you don't see a new position at town meeting and be like, wait a second, we didn't review it. But at the same time, both Mark and myself have been very clear with the chief, and I'll reiterate it after this conversation, that if he does have a change of mind as he starts to go through this process, we need to be brought in, the second anyone says SAP. But right now he's not contemplating that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Next item is discussion of existing salary structure. So I'm going to try to frame this first, and then would welcome thoughts from Mark and Vanessa, and then we'll open it up to board discussion. So where we left off a couple meetings ago was we all agreed we wanted to look into what our options are to review salaries and classifications mid-cycle. This all started over the summer when we approved a above midpoint in terms of a step when the recreation director came on. We all agreed during that discussion that we really wanted to focus on other positions, not one single position, but other positions in that department head category, to make sure that we were being fair to our existing employees from a step perspective. At subsequent meetings, we had discussions and started to receive some data, sometimes formatted better than others, just in terms of what the comp communities around us had for similar titled positions, without sort of any detailed review of the underlying job responsibilities of each of those positions. We then, I would say, have had a split discussion amongst the four of us in terms of some passionately believing we should get outside assistance, subject to obviously funding, some passionately believing that we should get absolutely not spend $1 on this and just try to fix it internally, and I'd say others that kind of in the middle. So what we have in front of us today is some salary data that they were able to gather in kind of left to right in terms of our current positions. I don't really want to go into any one specific position in general. It's really provided as an FYI of what we had asked them to do. And we've also obtained and gone through a public procurement process to get an outside bid in terms of what it would take for someone to review it on the outside. As we've discussed, in prior meetings. Just because we got a bid doesn't mean we have to accept it. And that really is, I think, a discussion we have to have today. I see the following potential outcomes from our discussion today. One is we can vote to do nothing and continue as is for another 2 years until our next quadrennial review. Two, we can vote to accept the proposal that's presented in front of us, and we can talk about the scope and plus or minuses based on what they've outlined. And review all positions and basically reset our quadrennial review. But we'd have to review all positions. We can't cherry pick of we think we have an issue at position A versus position B. It's all or nothing in terms of if we have an intent of resetting our quadrennial review. If we vote to go down that path, just full disclosure, we do not have the money in our personnel board budget for this current fiscal year to fully fund the proposal that has been received. In per Mark's memo, they did go out to bid, had 4 vendors involved, only one actually submitted a formal response, right? So we followed all the public procurement at this point. So if we do vote to do something with an external provider today, then it's going to require me to likely go to the select board and explain why we think we need to do this off cycle, why we did not put it in our budget to begin with for this year, and either solicit the use of ARPA funds or some sort of interdepartmental transfer. And another option is the reserve fund. But I will throw this out there now. As a former advisory member, and I know Dorian has sat in that seat as well, reserve is typically emergency, right? So we would really need to say that this is an emergency and justify it if we were to go that route. So there are options. So I don't want funding to be to stand in the way, but this discussion would not stop today. If we choose and needed funding, it would require supplemental votes by at least the select board, depending on our discussion. The other option we have is, I'll call it B2, which would be to take the proposal but scale it back a little bit, but still review all the positions, but likely not go down, I'll call it the rabbit hole of interviews and job description reviews and everything we went through just 2 years ago and have really subsequently continued to refine since the finalization of that process, which would result candidly in some sort of lower fee based on how the vendor has outlined it. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any other options that they'd like to throw on the table for discussion. I don't want to know where everyone's at yet. I just want to know if there's other options that anyone thinks we should be considering based on where this started a few months ago and where we're at. Because we are at a time of the year where we either need to get going if we're going to do something and effectuate something for the annual town meeting, or we need to say, thought about it, we understand, but we're not going to proceed for X, Y, or Z reason. So any other options?
Not for me.
I've been on the record, I oppose any spending, particularly $20,000 for another study. I would think if we've got $20,000, which we have to get or whatever, it would be better spent. My understanding is that there's two problems with the study. Number one, I don't think the company did a great job. I think they let us down in the second round. Number two is our former chairman, when we adjusted these rates, and put them on the new grid. I believe his opinion was we didn't want to really go overboard and give some people bigger steps than what others got. And the other is the lack of trust in us, the town, doing their own gathering of information. I think there was probably about eight people, current employees, that had a lot of longevity, that kind of felt slighted about that and wound up. And I understand what Mark has to do with hiring new people. He's got to be in the market. He's got to pay for them. But some of those people wind up better off than someone that's been here for 10 or 15 years. And I think rather than spending $20,000 to study, maybe we ought to look at the longevity policy. If someone's been here for 5 years and you give them $400, they've been here 20 years, you give them $850. You can divvy that, put that $20,000 toward the longevity chart, and pay these long-term employees a little more longevity or something, But I know one of my fellow members that I think they feel that everybody's paid fine. They just want more money. Well, everybody wants more. No matter what job you're in, you never feel like you never feel like you're paid enough. What's the phrase you always hear? It's above my pay grade, So I think rather than spending money on another study, we should look at helping out the people that we already have and try to keep them.
All right. Before I get any more opinions, Mark, is there anything you want to add for the group to consider as personnel director?
So what kind of gas you want me to pour on the fire? I just to speak to John's comment for a second, I don't disagree with his point about longevity and trying to help the people that are here. But that's half the issue. That only helps us with half the issue. John's absolutely correct. If we have a long-time incumbent walk out the door tomorrow and we have to hire somebody else, we're likely going to be paying that person, what the market is bearing, which is likely going to be an increase, however significant, over what the person we have here is currently making. The downside of that is that we are also going to lose the institutional knowledge, the history, and everything else that person has accumulated over their career here. So I think doing something to address both the retention of current employees as well as the recruitment, setting us up for the recruitment of new employees, we've got to look at it from both directions. Not a whole lot to add. I do agree. I think Jason had said this, and if he didn't, I'll say it. In the conversations with Labor Council, that if the board does a full paying class review now, it will reset your 4-year requirement to do it again. If you do anything less than, if you take a look at a smaller subsection of positions, whether it's a particular grade or a particular grouping of employees, that's something you're going to do, and it's not going to reset your clock. You'd still have to do a full one in another 2 years. Yeah, the only other thing I'll say, and it was at the end of my memo, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to put it or not, but I just wanted to make the point. I've been through a lot of these in my career. You've been through, some of you have been through a couple of them. You've at least been through one. This may have not been a great example, the last one you went through. But at the end of the day, these paying class reviews don't tend to affect a whole lot of people, right? You know, you're affecting maybe, 5, 6, 8 positions, and all of the other positions remain unaffected and not impacted positively from the study, which does create a certain level of morale issues, second guessing, questioning the board, questioning the vendor, and the process as a whole. I get it. That's the nature of these. I just want the board to be aware that doing this now, I would not expect some omnibus outcome that is, regardless of the process that happened last time, which I think nobody can disagree was not a great process and what may be looked at as a clean process all the way through. Even in the best process, you're still going to get a similar result where limited positions are going to be affected. So your choices here, in my opinion, are either do nothing and wait 2 years and do the whole thing again on cycle, or do everything now. And using, looking at it from a lot of these external comps, and trying to make sure that we're paying our people that are here competitively, and we've set ourselves up to be competitive when we do have vacancies and we have to fill them.
Dorian, Michelle, who wants to go first?
I have a question. Mark, when we did when we sent this out to the 4 bidders, did we say we wanted to do the full scope, or did we say we only wanted to do part of it? Because, well, like Collins Center said, they didn't want to do it because the scope wasn't broad enough. So do we have the bids for a full scope, or is this just the partial, which is what we've been talking about?
So this is looking at all of the positions, Dorian.
Okay.
We did not do the positions that are currently vacant. And we did have the provision to add them back in as we needed to as we went along. But this was for the full scope. This wasn't saying, for example, we just want you to look at the grade 8 people. This wasn't narrowed. So this is really what you would pay for a full paying class. And the way that this was bid was going through the whole process, the JAQs, the interviews, looking at all the comps and everything. I don't know that level is necessary. I mean, we just went through the job descriptions twice, right? We did them as part of the paying class study, and then when we put them in the format, we went through the whole thing again. And we continued to make revisions. So I don't know that we need to do that. My one concern, since you asked the question, my one concern is that we only have one quote here. And, it doesn't give us a whole lot of comparison. It's either this or nothing. It's some of this, I think, may be a timing issue for people in terms of workload and capacity. But the field to do this kind of work is also narrowing, and there are fewer people that are doing it right now. So that's not helping availability either. But again, that's my other only concern is that you really only have one quote to work with. It's like, either we go with this one or, we can go back and beat the bushes again.
Okay, so this is not reviewing the job description. So that's what Collins Center is talking about, because that's what they want to do all over again.
My understanding is they want to come in and do a full structural review all over again.
Yeah, why didn't they do it the first time?
Which we don't need that, because we have part of this stuff that we've been doing all the time. So, okay. Are there any other companies out there beside MGT that we could reach out to? I know we had used a different one. My first year on the board, we did. This will be my 3rd review.
This is a successor entity to that firm.
Yeah. So yeah, GovHR, Dorian, is I think who you're thinking of.
Yes.
GovHR was, for lack of a better way to put it, absorbed into this company that bid.
Okay,
Okay, so while they do have some of those people that have familiarity with us.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the team that may, so this may be like a brand new look, for us, that they don't have a whole lot of history, with us. We sent it out to Collins Center, we sent it out to Municipal Resources, Inc., which does have an HR arm, that does this stuff. We sent it out to Community Paradigm. They don't normally, they get involved more in manager searches and some of these other larger issues. They don't do a lot of HR, but they did not deem to respond. And then, as you mentioned, Collins Center. So those are the big people that are out there right now. There's another company, CSS, which is starting to broaden into some of the HR stuff. I'm not sure. I've not talked to anyone who's had anything done with them yet, so I'm not sure I want to be on the front side of the wave on something like this.
well, I know GovHR, I think it was Joe Ellen. She did a
Yes.
very thorough job. So, and then we went to the next one and I would have to do a third one. So,
Yeah.
okay, you answered my question. Thank you, Mark.
Do you have any
No.
comments, Dorian, before I go to Michelle, or you said the questions?
No, I just want to be fair to the employees. If this is actually something we can fix ourselves, I'm willing to try that. And if not, then go ahead and spend the money. Right now with the budgets the way they are and economics and everything, I'm a little hesitant to spend it, but I'm going to go with the recommendation of Mark. If he feels strongly that we need to do this, he's our personnel director. So I'm kind of sit back and wait for a little bit more information before I can really make up my mind.
Okay, Michelle?
Yeah, and I had along the lines of the bids. Mark, do you think that some of the reason we didn't get a different response is because the scope was a little more comprehensive? If we narrowed the scope, do you think we might, and took out some of those components of the job description reviews and the employee interviews, do you think we might get other bids?
Well, the funny thing, Michelle, we did narrow the scope, right? We did not include JAQs and interviews and all that in there, but the company added them in.
They added them back in.
Acknowledged that, you know what, this is what we normally do and what we recommend to our clients. But if you don't want to do it, then obviously you can back out these items. So we did try to narrow the scope and hopefully people would be a little more comfortable understanding that, this is not, the full process as it usually is, which can be, very time consuming from a consultant standpoint.
If we were to address this in-house, what would the approach be?
So I'm not prepared, I think, to talk about that today. I put an approach together? Absolutely. My problem is that the people that I would identify that are probably best suited to help me with this could potentially be, I mean, look, anybody who's helping me is pretty much going to be an SAP employee, right? So I don't need people, we talked about credibility issue, with Collins Center and what they did. What's that going to look like, Michelle, if, people that are working on this are the people that are positively impacted by an outcome?
I asked about that because I know that we are looking at all the options. One of the options is do nothing. One is sort of do something in-house. One is think about something internally. And so in order to be able to make a decision, I think it's important that we talk about these options. What are the things that could be of value, but where might be some of the roadblocks? And I think doing something in-house speaks to your concern about, I guess, the credibility and the validity of the study and because of who's involved in.
Yeah, and I don't, I know that, and you may have heard this, at meetings, you've got, and when we try and do policies and when the board is saying, well, maybe we should run this through the town administrator as a personnel director. And, some of the elected departments and everything were like, well, no, we electeds are not subservient to appointed. So they don't feel process-wise that they should have to go through the personnel director in order to do these things, they want to come to the board directly, and it's, so that just makes it a little convoluted, you know, what if all of the changes happen to be under select board appointed departments? You know, what if there are minimal changes to, you know, I don't want there to be, if we're gonna do this, you know, it's gotta be clean. We don't want there to be any potential, you know, inferences of favoritism, or, you know, well, Mark likes these people, or, you know, Mark doesn't like these people, or anything in that. So it's almost good to have a fresh look at it, but you pay for a fresh look too. I get that.
Do we know? What I'm weighing is sort of the implications of doing something now versus doing something in 2 years. Like, I don't have a good sense of how critical the issue is and how broad it is in terms of how many roles are maybe in. I mean, I know we collected this data. I don't know if there was an analysis to highlight where we have issues, or that's the part that I'm having trouble with. I feel like I don't have enough information to make a really.
Well, this is the problem too. As you look at some of the positions on here, you'll notice that not every community has positions
The
with
same
the same
position.
titles. Now, there are communities that have obviously the same titles as some of us. However, I have no idea if the roles and responsibilities for, you know, I'll just pick it because the executive assistant to the select board is the same here as it is in another community. You know, here, that position has procurement responsibilities and some public records responsibility. You know, that may be a major factor. So did we go back and grab all the job descriptions and do all of that? My hourly rate would have been significantly higher if we were going out and collecting all of those and doing that data, because we're then doing essentially what we're trying to hire a consultant to do. But again, you know, you're paying for that credibility for that outside view. I'm sorry, I'm not helping you.
It's not even, it is a situation that I think we just are gonna have to come to terms with one way or the other. Because I don't think there's a clean answer.
Yeah, I think I'll give you my, without specifying individual positions, Michelle, when I looked at the data, it was very clear to me that if I were to just choose based on that data, which is not what we can do, right? Big difference. There would certainly be positions that I would zero in on for a compact analysis in terms of, you know, trying to figure out if what we were seeing on the spreadsheet really is reality. Like, could you justify some of the differences we were seeing? Like, community A has far more responsibilities than we're asking in Southborough, so that's why we have the difference. But that would be essentially cherry picking, right? Certain positions, right? And it would lead to the big caution that Mark has stated a few times now is you may fix those, right? And you may do those perfectly, right? And that's a big if, but you're going to create some other issue because what if you didn't select another position that probably should have been picked? So I do think, to me at least, it is very clear that we have an issue in front of us for far greater than one position. The question is, at what speed and how do we fix the issue? Realizing that municipal government, in terms of getting funds, are challenging in of itself to do any sort of analysis. So I think that's where we're at. Are there other thoughts?
Could you tell us again what our options are to get the funding to do this? So how short are we first? So we have what,
So
5?
let's start here. Does anyone have handy what we paid the Collins Center last time?
I think they were like 16 something, weren't they? They were I think it was like 16 to change. but I don't know.
If Mark or Vanessa could look for that
Let
while
me
we're
look for that.
talking, that would be
I'll be-
helpful. So the quote we have in front of us is for 19,000 and change. We have a few remember, we have kind of some groupings in our budget this year for consulting and employee development, and then there's a separate line for tuition reimbursement, if I remember correctly, in terms of how our budget came together this year. We obviously don't want to mix and match some of those, especially with the next conversation we're going to be having on tuition reimbursement. We move on from this agenda item. So our budget alone cannot sustain, even if we mixed and matched all of our things together, our line items together, which I would never propose to do. So I think the options, Dorian, in terms of funding are the select board still does have ARPA funding potentially available, which is cash in the door, doesn't impact the tax rate. It's a one-time sort of thing. And they have been pulling money back for projects that aren't going to be completed within the timeline. So that is an option of at least teed up to the chair of the select board. If we decide to go that, I have absolutely no guarantees that they would authorize it, but that would be if we were in favor of going that direction, that's where I would go next to find the funding.
How much are we looking for, Jason? Are we just looking to use the 7,500 and nothing else in our budget and then going for the difference?
I would, that's a point of discussion because it's not as, I don't know that I want to use the full amount because that's not what it was intended for, right? Just my personal view
Okay,
of the 7,500. And we would normally budget for this in a year that we're going to do a quadrennial review so that there's no questions about it. It doesn't sacrifice other programming in items that we should be taking care of. So I would probably look for some middle ground, right? So if they said we could get you 9 or 11 or 7, right? Then I think that might inform your answer again, if we wanted to go that route.
okay.
The other path we have is some sort of interdepartmental transfer or reserve fund. I will tell you, even if I was in favor of moving forward on the proposal, I am not in favor of approaching advisory for funding on this. That's where I would draw a very hard line if the committee voted in favor of moving this forward. So I think your other option is to remove some of the scope that the consultant added. Now they may say we don't want to do it. That is certainly a risk, but I think they went through a lot of detail in their proposal. And I think there are things in there that if we were to move forward, I would recommend we pull back on. Again, if we move forward. Good, Mark.
Yeah, I found the quote they provided. It was $12,000.
I was going to say it was much lower than what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, it was $12,000 if they did the salary survey. It was $8,000 if we did the salary survey.
Okay.
It might
Okay.
be helpful if we decide to move, and maybe this is another point of information that will help our decision. To give them a budget and think about it in a phased-in approach. So what could we do with X amount of money this year? And then think about more of a phased-in approach, or tell them what our budget is. I mean, I know that was in the scope, but I felt like in this, it was, they probably read that and thought all of that money was really available for them to use. I guess what I'm saying is what happens if we go back and say, thank you for the proposal. Here's really what we were hoping to spend, and let them pare it down and see if they wish to be considered.
I think that's what we would have to do if we actually move forward with it. So, John, just to be clear, you're not in favor of spending even $1 on this. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is. If you look at $19,000 for this new proposal, say whatever it be, $19,000, and you've got 10 employees, current employees that have longevity better than 10 to 15 years that feel that they're, you know, they're out of place. You divide that 19 out by 10 people, that gives you $1,900 that you could spend on them versus a company that is made up of retired employees who see the Golden West for putting together a 10-page report that tells you something that you got already through your own surveys. I just don't believe it. I'd rather, our responsibility under the bylaw is to represent the interest of both the taxpayer and the town employees. And I can't see spending a dime on a study for just about anything, really. I'd rather see it go to the employees.
John, we don't have the $19,000. We don't have that. So that's,
Come
if
up,
we can get the, no, wait, if we could get the money, you can consider it, but we don't have that money. So you would have to go to the ARPA, to the selectmen to ask for money for ARPA to give $1,900 basically bonuses to correct something or
Which-
interdepartmental transfers. We're not going to get the money. That's just not going to work. That's not a good enough reason. Or the reserve fund. There's no way the advisory group is going to give us money from the reserve fund for that reason. So we don't have the $19,000.
take my chances on the town meeting approving, giving an extra $500 to a year to a 15-year employee, then
Well, then you're not dividing up $19,000. You're just doing $500. Like,
Well, and you can't even
I
use
don't
ARPA
think it's
funds
doable.
that way. So, I mean, you've got a unique set of funds that are available that we don't usually have, right? That would be a potential source.
So my suggestion, not that I was asked, is that, you try to make a decision on what you want to do on this study first. And, if you decide that you don't feel comfortable proceeding with this and that, then you can maybe take up other options and ideas and then we can move the discussion in that direction. In some of the other things that are being discussed, which again would be an alternative to doing the study.
Right, because we still have the recruitment issue we need to address. Correct.
Yes. But that's not a Southborough issue. That's a public service, public sector issue that there just seem to be fewer and fewer people out there. And, again, we somehow seem to, continue to, be getting good people in here. But, we have had a couple of missteps, based on, timing and availability of people too. So we're not feeling it as much as some, but we are feeling it.
well, I feel we ought to do all we can to keep the people we have that, as Mark said before, they've got all this 10 years or 15 years of knowledge, how the town operates, who they have to go to, everything else. And you bring in a new person, you pay them more, and they have to go through the whole learning curve. I don't know. This doesn't make common sense to me.
John, that's the reality of the world today. I mean, if my husband were to retire, the new guy coming in would make at least his salary and probably plus more, because that's just the market. That's just reality right now. And I understand what you're saying, but I mean, you're not gonna bring someone new in at a higher salary and then give everybody else a huge raise, because that's just not reality. You can't do that. I understand how you feel. I feel the same way, but you can't do that.
Yeah, that's wrong. Do it.
So, why can I'm not in favor of doing the full scope that's presented in the proposal, because I think it goes a step beyond what at least I had hoped to accomplish in an off cycle. So, but I am not content just kind of letting this fester in risk losing. You always will have turnover in employees, and we need to acknowledge that. Just no matter how well intentioned we are and how right we get this, you will naturally have turnover because you have amazing employees that will find other amazing opportunities that maybe we don't. It doesn't line up in terms of promotional opportunities, et cetera, at a certain point in time. So with that being said, I would like to explore a few options. One, approach the select board and see if they have any money to commit to doing anything. Up to a certain threshold, we can call it 10 or 15, solely through ARPA. Just solely through ARPA with that question in mind. I would like to also propose that we potentially split the difference here, unless there's something magically available to deal with this now, that we consider for our FY26 budget doing our quadrennial review then. So basically pulling it up a year, but getting the funding through our normal mechanism, which would be town meeting, but articulate why we're going to do it off cycle and let the voters decide if they think that that's the right use of funds. So that's kind of my sliding scale, so to say. But let's just to say, so then that would say, well, what do you do in the meantime if those, well, either wait for FY26 funding, or if the select board says, no, there's nothing available via ARPA. I think there are some internal mechanisms we can look at, like longevity and like our steps in terms of, we had a few employees last year as an example that moved multiple steps, right? Like, is there something we can do there that's consistent across the board, not going after certain positions, but setting certain criteria to, again, create a middle ground while we wait to do kind of another study. I really don't want to do an external study, but I also don't know how you have an option not to, given all the perceived potential conflict with appointing authorities, supervision, and just naturally the people that could do this the best are likely already on the SAP and subject to the outcome of this. So it's not an easy topic. I think we're all on the same page with what we want the outcome to be, which is retention of our employees at all tenures, in terms of we have some that are here 5 years, but probably are on the lower end of where they think they should be. And that was, I think, Mark's point a few minutes ago. So that would be my proposal to keep this moving. And if we hear feedback from the select board in the meantime, we can call a special meeting and revisit it, because I think it threads a delicate needle in terms of moving this forward, but at the same time, understanding John's concern about not wanting to spend money that could otherwise go to the employees, in an outside fashion. And I think it also would allow Mark and Vanessa an opportunity to go back to the vendor and say, you're only vendor, but there's some things in the scope that you listed in terms of your fee that weren't in our scope. Why, right? And is there an opportunity to revisit that? Again, with the interest of trying to find some sort of middle ground.
Are there other not other vendors we can send the proposal out to, or send the bid to?
You'd have to redo the process, right, Mark, from a procurement perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we did So, you know, this is, it does require us to go out and get quotes, which is what we did. It's a little bit, it's a quote unquote formal process, but it's less formal than advertising and sealed bids and a lot of that stuff and that. So, you know, there is considering there was only one person who responded, you know, we do have the ability to, try to negotiate with them a little bit in terms of that scope. I'll, you know, let Vanessa jump in if she wants to. You know, I mean, it really is a thinning of the consultants that are out there. Most of the consultants have been around for a long time and they're not, it's kind of like municipal employees, Michelle. They're not getting replaced with other people who want the
Consultants.
jobs.
Sorry. Are you only considering consultants that have only worked with municipal clients? Or are you considering consultants, for example, that do a lot of work in the nonprofit space or in other sort of a broader span of industries?
It's a fair question. I think our view probably has been a little more narrow. I'm not sure that we've gone outside of those that are familiar with public sector employment.
There are just a couple, I mean, there might be some other consultants that is not maybe what they do primarily, but they do a lot of nonprofit work and could have had clients in this space. I just I think it would sit better with me if we had more than one option in terms of,
Agreed, yeah.
you know, and so that's why I'm thinking, is there as part of this, what could be potential next steps, thinking about sharing that with other consultants?
Yeah, I mean, I know you live in that world and, you know, if there are people that you feel, you know, we could send this out to, should the board decide they'd like to have more options, you know, happy to have you share, you know, those with Vanessa and I mean, the worst they can tell us is no. So.
Okay, sure.
So Jason, I have a question, either you or Mark can answer. If we only do a partial review and we don't do the full scale review, are we gonna have to do this again in 2 years?
Yes.
So we're just throwing money away. So we should either be doing it now or waiting. Because otherwise
so-
we're paying for it twice or 1.5
All,
times.
all or nothing is, I think, the options I presented earlier in the meeting. I stand by.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna agree with that. It's either all or nothing, because we don't want to pay for it twice.
Yeah,
We're-
and
you know,
deal with the outcome of fixing one situation and making four
Right.
other worse potentially.
okay, thank you.
All right. So what do we think on the next steps? You okay with what I outlined?
I think we should go to the selectmen first and see if there's any ARPA funding.
And if there's
And
no
you guys
ARPA
did
funding, we have to just figure out what we're gonna do internally and decide whether we want to approach the town for a quadrennial review 1 year early in FY 26.
I think so.
Yeah, I don't want to do it twice in a very condensed amount of time. We've already had a review by the Collins Center, which is how we ended up here. So I guess
Mhm.
let's
Okay.
take one small step and see where we land.
All right. So expect potentially a meeting sooner than a month from now. So for purpose of meeting schedule, when we, I'll have Vanessa follow up, select board's meeting tonight, it has this on their agenda, like ARPA in general, correct, Mark, on their agenda?
Yes, they have ARPA tonight. I know that the chair would love to close up ARPA, so that any money that's coming back to us from projects that may have not been able to use all the funds or it didn't go as they hoped it would, will then be potentially reallocated. And so I don't I don't know where the board lands tonight in terms of available funds, but obviously you have a much better idea after tonight.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to draft revisions to the tuition reimbursement policy then.
So,
Who wants to take the lead on this? Vanessa?
I'll get started and be very happy for Michelle to chime in whenever she'd like. So we've been working, Michelle and I and Taylor West on this process for the last several months, looking at our policy and how we can maybe streamline this, but also find a way to incorporate professional development requests for certain workshops and seminars and trainings that might not be something your normal department line item could fund. You know, I think one example is, you know, the procurement training. We have a brand new civil engineer, you know, who'd really like to go through that process, you know, folks in positions like that. And that's a very expensive course. It's a 3-part course many times. So this is how we've reframed this whole process, because our requests from tuition reimbursement have really gone down. We're actually really, really lucky that so many of our department heads and other employees have master's degrees already. So we framed it as trying to meld this together. We really got a little stuck on the deadline piece. You know, traditionally it was a deadline that ended December, and that just wasn't working anymore because so many of the academic institutions, you know, those classes are more on a rolling basis or accelerated in some cases. So we have tried to frame it to incorporate both of these requests, and this is the draft that we have for the board to consider currently. And I'll let Michelle chime in on her additional thoughts.
You did amazing. I guess the only other piece I would add is that we tried to address the things that we could control. Which is why we went with more of a rolling approach and more of a ability to grant requests based on what we have available, because we're not able to get enough understanding and responses to help guide us in terms of how many people might actually take advantage of the reimbursement for tuition versus a professional development opportunity. So we tried to sort of put some guide rails around the things we thought we had control of and knowledge of. And then there's some other places where we're going to have to base it on how we get the request and the priority. I think the other piece is, as I was working with Vanessa on this, is a change in how requests are administered, and leaving that with sort of the personnel director, with being informing the personnel board. I don't know the value, and maybe you all can, you know, enlighten me, the value add, particularly around some of the professional development requests, because I don't know the jobs that intricately. Being able to say yes or no, that this is a valid request. I feel like Vanessa and Mark are closer to that, along with working with their supervisor, to be able to address that. And so you'll see a change in that space where it is more those requests going through Mark and Vanessa. They make that assessment, but they keep us obviously informed of the requests that have come through.
The one other thing I wanted to mention is we've drafted, you'll see under eligibility on page 1, it says full-time, non-union, regular employees. The SAP currently says part-time employees, although the requests we've had in the past have not been from part-time employees that I recall. So I just wanted to call that out and note that, you know, again, we didn't put in a firm deadline, and this is, you know, a draft we wanted to bring back to the full board for your consideration.
Does someone define
Right.
passing grade to me?
I didn't hear your question. I'm sorry, Doreen.
Can someone define passing grade? Is that a D- because they passed the grade? I mean, are we going to put some kind of a parameter on that, or are we just going to take anything that comes at us?
Of course, we're not. That's why we indicated a grade. So usually a passing grade is C or better. If you would prefer, we can actually put a grade in there.
I just think that's really, I mean, if someone comes in with like a D or something in a thing,
That's not-
we're still passing.
Yeah.
So I think we have to specify that.
Okay, I think that's
I
reasonable.
think- Yeah, I just think that needs to be clarified. That was my only question.
Thank
Great
you.
job on this. It looks great.
Vanessa, does that make sense? C, is it a C typically that you would
Yeah.
see? And we can always go back with some of the other, I was trying to remember if any of the other policies that we had a chance to review had an actual grade or.
I can go back and check on that.
Okay. we can make-
Also, some of institutions have gone towards a pass-fail versus, you know.
That's true
exceeding.
too. So then in that case, obviously we would go with the pass, not with the fail.
I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. Obviously, I think there's been a lot of work and thought put into it. And I think, we're not going to know whether it's perfect until we have a few test cases, right? So our goal with all of this was to make a resource available to the employees that's broader than what we had currently available because people weren't taking advantage of it, right? So I think we just need to monitor it. I would say I like the notification aspect of this, right? Just to make sure, Mark, I'm going to pick on you for a second, right? That it's not just employees in the select board or town administrator's office that are getting this, just so that we can, make sure that it's fair and equitable across kind of all departments that would be eligible for this sort of training.
I agree. I think we would, if you don't already have a tracking mechanism to track when requests come in, from who, sort of that piece, especially because we are saying priority, how we're basing priority in the order it's received. And I think that would also help support, Jason, what you were, what you just mentioned, that we really are following that as our approach to reviewing these requests.
I would say my other comment on this is not anything that's in here, but it's what's not in here. And I don't think what I'm going to say belongs in the personnel board policy, but I would encourage Mark, as I know the town is going through financial policy updates in terms of what goes in a department budget versus what should go through kind of what I'll call, this is more of a general fund that's available to all departments, that you, Brian, and the finance team really articulate what should be in a department budget versus which is recurring type work is my recurring type trainings that they have to go to every year to keep a certification or et cetera, versus this is clearly enhancement and development beyond what is, they normally, I'm throwing that out as an example, but I would think you'd want to have some policies so you're not budgeting for this twice or budgeting for this not at all, especially if our budget got peeled back in a year or expanded in a year.
No, I don't disagree with you, Jason. I think that, personnel board has never wanted to be, the first option, for funding issues. They'd like to see it carried in departments' budgets. They'd like to see things that, especially talking about this and tuition reimbursement, this is something you plan for. This isn't something that, well, you know what, last week I really thought I wanted to do this, so I'm going to start moving ahead with this now. So this is more of a planned issue, but I think that this is more that if people do come to you for this, then, this is the process they should follow. But, there is consideration too that we should be looking at doing something like this, within the budgets, if it's planned enough in advance and it falls within the regular budgeting cycle. So I hear you.
Jason, would you like us to, go back and work on that pass-fail section and bring back a final version next month?
Just my personal opinion, I'm comfortable just adding a C in a parentheses somewhere in there.
Sure.
C, right? And I think it's understood if it's a pass-fail course and they get a pass, then that's passing. Unless someone else wants to see it again, I'm certainly happy to vote today. So welcome thoughts from others.
I think I would put just pass acknowledgement, because if they fail it, they're not gonna get the money, so why not just clarify it in this document? It may be a pass-fail course, but if they're not passing it, if you say pass-fail, it's almost like you would accept either one, as long as they acknowledge that they took the course. I mean, we
No,
should
no, no.
be,
So I'm saying that you need to get a C or better if there's a grade, and a P if it's a pass fail.
Yeah,
That's what we're
okay.
asking to add.
okay.
And the
Um,
thing is, I was listening to your comments, Mark. Vanessa, we might want to add on the, I'm not as concerned about the tuition because it's a reimbursement after the fact. Is the professional development, that's not a reimbursement, so we might want to add a time frame. My concern being people may make a request,
mhm.
and there's not enough time for that review to happen, or it's a rushed request. So we might want to put another bullet or something in there that indicates requests have to be made, I don't know, 30 days in advance, or something that gives some time for a proper review.
Okay. Thank you.
So we'll make those 3 changes: the grade, the pass, and then a timeline for the professional development request.
Great job, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Then I will make a motion that we approve the policy with the edits described during this meeting. Is there a second?
Second,
Is there any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. John?
Aye.
Michelle? Dorian?
I,
And I am I as well. Okay. Is there any other business for today?
no, end the meeting.
Well, is there any public comment? Seeing no public comment, we will email to set the next board date depending upon the feedback from the select board. And I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second,
Roll call vote. Dorian?
I.
Michelle?
Aye.
John?
Aye.